If you're listening to this late at night, alone or wearing headphones, you might want to think twice before continuing. What you're about to hear isn't a made-up ghost story or some over-the-top fiction. These are disturbing, true night shift horror stories, the kind that crawl under your skin because they feel real, because they could happen to anyone working after midnight. Gas stations, hospitals, motels, places that are supposed to be quiet and safe suddenly feel very different when the rest of the world is asleep. This is Eerie Podcast, a channel where we don't rush the fear. We let it build slowly, minute by minute, until it stays with you long after the story ends. If you enjoy realistic horror, psychological dread, and stories that make you check behind you without knowing why, then this channel is for you. Make sure you subscribe to Eerie Podcast right now, because once this story starts, you won't want to miss what comes next. And trust me, the nights only get darker from here. Daniel Brooks took the night shift at the gas station because it paid a little more and because no one else wanted it. The place sat just off Interstate 80 in Wyoming, surrounded by miles of empty land that looked flat and endless even in daylight. At night, it felt worse. The wind never stopped, rattling the loose metal sign outside and pushing cold air through the cracks in the building. After midnight, traffic thinned out until the highway sounded like a distant river instead of a road. Inside, the station felt sealed off from the world. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the coffee machine clicked and hissed on a loop, and the smell of fuel never fully went away. Daniel told himself it was an easy job. Lock the doors, clean the counters, watch the cameras, and wait for morning. Still, every night, once the clock passed 12, the silence grew heavier, like the building was holding its breath. Most nights followed the same dull pattern. Daniel wiped down the counter again, even when it was already clean, restocked shelves that no one touched, and checked the security monitors more often than necessary. The screens usually showed nothing but an empty parking lot and the dark outline of the highway beyond it. Time felt stretched, almost warped, as if the hours were longer than they should be. Around 2 in the morning, his body always felt strange, alert in a way that made his skin tight and his thoughts sharp. He caught himself staring at the digital clock, watching the numbers change. The station felt colder then, even though the heater hummed steadily. It was during one of these moments, with the clock creeping toward 2:17 a.m., that Daniel first noticed something on the screen he couldn't explain. On the monitor facing the front of the station, a figure stood near the edge of the lot. At first, Daniel thought it was a trick of shadow or glare. He leaned closer, heart slowing as his eyes adjusted. The figure looked like a man, tall and still, standing just beyond the glow of the lights. The face was impossible to see, swallowed by darkness, but the body was clear enough. What unsettled Daniel wasn't the sight of the man. It was the way he didn't move. No shifting of weight, no step forward or back. Just standing there, perfectly still, angled toward the building as if staring straight through the glass. Daniel glanced at the clock without thinking. 2:17 a.m. The number stuck in his mind harder than it should have, like it meant something he didn't yet understand. He told himself it was probably a stranded traveler or someone checking directions. That made sense. This was a highway after all. Still, something felt off. The man didn't wave. He didn't approach the door. He didn't even turn his head. After a minute that felt much longer, Daniel grabbed his jacket and stepped outside. The cold hit him instantly, sharp and biting. The parking lot lights hummed above him, bright and unforgiving, but there was no one there. No footsteps in the dirt, no car idling nearby, no sound except the wind. Daniel walked the length of the lot, feeling exposed and foolish. When he went back inside and checked the monitor again, the screen showed the same empty space he was standing in moments before. His chest tightened, and he felt the first real hint of fear settle in. Daniel laughed it off quietly to himself. Long nights did things to your head. He'd heard that before. Back inside, he poured himself a cup of stale coffee and avoided looking at the screens for a while. Still, the feeling didn't leave. It followed him through the rest of the shift, sitting heavy in his stomach. Every sound seemed louder. Every flicker of light pulled his attention. When his shift finally ended and the sun began to lighten the horizon, he felt relief wash over him, but it didn't last. Driving home, he couldn't stop thinking about the man's shape, the way it seemed so solid and unreal at the same time. Most of all, he couldn't stop thinking about the time. 2:17 a.m. replayed in his mind like a warning he hadn't understood yet. The next night, Daniel tried to act normal. He stuck to his routine, kept busy, and told himself he wouldn't overreact if he saw something strange again. But as midnight passed, the same tension crept back in. His eyes drifted to the clock more often than he wanted. When it hit 2:16, he felt his pulse quicken. At exactly 2:17, the monitor flickered slightly, and the figure appeared again. This time, it stood closer to the pumps, just inside the edge of the light. Daniel felt a chill move through him that had nothing to do with the weather. The man's posture was wrong, too straight, too deliberate. Daniel stood frozen, watching, unable to look away. The longer he stared, the more it felt like the man was aware of him, like the screen wasn't a barrier at all. When Daniel stepped outside again, his movements were slower, more cautious. The lot was empty once more. No signs, no explanation. He stayed outside longer this time, scanning the darkness until his eyes hurt. When he finally went back in, the station felt different. Smaller, closer. The walls seemed tighter, the lights harsher. He locked the door behind him and leaned against the counter, breathing hard. He told himself this was still just the first week, still just nerves. Yet, deep down, he knew something had changed. The station no longer felt like a quiet place to work through the night. It felt like a place where something waited, counting down the minutes, always arriving at the same time and always watching him long after the screen went dark. By the third night, Daniel stopped hoping it wouldn't happen again. At 2:17 a.m., the figure appeared on the screen as if it had been scheduled. This time it stood closer than before, near the far edge of the parking lot lights. Daniel didn't move right away. He watched, counting his own breaths, noticing how the man's outline seemed sharper now, more defined. The shape didn't flicker or blur like a camera glitch should. It held steady, almost deliberate. When Daniel checked the time again, only a few seconds had passed, yet it felt longer, stretched thin. The man didn't wave or turn. He just stood there, facing the building. Daniel felt the quiet pressure of being observed, even though he knew it was just a screen. When he finally looked away, his reflection in the glass startled him, pale and tense, like he was already bracing for something worse. Each night after that, the man appeared closer. One night near the pumps, another night between two parking spaces. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Daniel started marking the distance in his head, counting how many steps it would take for someone to reach the door. The closer the figure got, the more details Daniel noticed. The clothes looked old, like something out of a forgotten decade, loose and faded. The man's posture was wrong, too straight and stiff, as if his body didn't fully understand how standing was supposed to work. Daniel tried to zoom in on the camera, but the image lost clarity the closer he looked, the face remaining a dark, unreadable shape. His stomach tightened every time the clock crept toward 2:17, his body reacting before his thoughts could catch up. One night, while the figure stood motionless near the pumps, the intercom crackled. Daniel jumped so hard he nearly spilled his coffee. At first it was just static, thin and uneven, like an old radio searching for a signal. Then he heard it, breathing, slow, uneven and close, as if someone was standing just on the other side of the wall. Daniel stared at the door, waiting for the handle to move. It didn't. He forced himself to speak into the intercom, his voice sounding smaller than he expected, asking if anyone needed help. The breathing didn't stop. It didn't change. After several seconds, the sound cut out abruptly, leaving behind a silence that felt louder than the noise had been. When Daniel checked the monitors again, the man was gone. Daniel called his manager the next morning, his voice tired and strained. At first, the manager laughed it off, saying night shifts mess with people's heads. But when Daniel mentioned the exact time, there was a pause on the line that stretched too long. The manager's tone changed, becoming careful, almost distant. He admitted that the last night clerk had complained about the same thing. Same time, same figure, same feeling of being watched. The man had quit without notice, leaving his uniform in the locker and his last shift unfinished. According to the manager, the clerk had said something strange on his way out, something Daniel couldn't shake. He said the guy wasn't staying outside anymore, the manager muttered. He said the guy was coming in. The line went quiet after that. Daniel started digging through the station's old records during the slow hours of his shift. The logbooks were thick and worn, filled with years of handwritten notes. He flipped through page after page until a pattern emerged. Again and again, scattered across different years, he saw the same phrase written in different handwriting. Camera glitch at 2:17 a.m. Sometimes it was followed by question marks, sometimes by nothing at all. Daniel realized with a cold certainty that people before him had seen something too. They had just chosen to explain it away. The realization didn't comfort him. It made the station feel older than it was, like it had been quietly collecting the same moment over and over again. As the nights passed, Daniel found himself trapped between watching the screens and fearing them. He couldn't stop looking, but every glance filled him with dread. When the clock approached 2:17, his chest tightened and his hands shook. The man began appearing closer to the building than ever before, sometimes so near that the reflection of the lights touched his silhouette. Daniel noticed something new then. The figure's head seemed slightly tilted, as if listening. The thought made Daniel's skin crawl. He began locking the door earlier than required and keeping the intercom volume low. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that the station wasn't protecting him. It was containing something, and that something was slowly figuring out how to cross the distance. One night, Daniel swore he felt movement behind him while watching the screen. He didn't turn right away. He waited, counting silently, forcing himself to stay calm. When he finally spun around, there was nothing there, but the air felt colder, heavier, pressing against his skin. He looked back at the monitor. The figure was gone, yet the camera showed something else instead. The inside of the store, captured from an angle Daniel rarely checked. The space behind the counter looked darker than it should have, like the light didn't fully reach it. Daniel leaned closer to the screen, his reflection overlapping the image. For a brief moment, he thought he saw a second shape standing just outside the frame. By the end of the week, Daniel was exhausted. Sleep didn't come easily anymore. When it did, he dreamed of standing still while something moved closer, step by step, always stopping just short of touching him. At work, the station no longer felt like a job site. It felt like a countdown. Every night he waited for 2:17, knowing it would arrive whether he wanted it to or not. He understood now that the man wasn't random. It wasn't a glitch. It was a pattern, and patterns didn't stop on their own. They completed themselves. And whatever was happening at that gas station, Daniel had the growing, sinking feeling that he was no longer just watching it unfold. He was part of it. At 2:17 a.m. on the final night, the man stood directly outside the glass door, not at the edge of the lot, not near the pumps, right there, inches from the entrance, close enough that the overhead light caught the outline of his shoulders. Daniel felt his heart slam against his ribs, as if his body recognized the danger before his mind could process it. The figure didn't reach for the handle. He didn't move at all. He simply stood there, facing inward, his head slightly lowered like he was listening. Daniel backed away from the counter slowly, the sound of his own breathing suddenly too loud. The cold returned, sharper than before, curling around his ankles and crawling up his spine. The digital clock above the register blinked once, still locked on 2:17, refusing to move forward. Daniel rushed into the small lock-in room behind the counter and slammed the door shut, his hands shaking as he twisted the bolt. The space smelled like dust and old cardboard, barely big enough for him to stand comfortably. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he pulled up the camera system, telling himself that proof mattered, that seeing it clearly would somehow make it manageable. He rewound the footage, watching the previous nights play back faster than they should have. The man appeared every time, right on schedule. But something was wrong. The angle didn't match Daniel's memory. The figure wasn't outside. It never had been. In every clip, the man stood inside the store, just beyond the edge of the frame, always close enough to be there, but never fully seen. Daniel leaned closer to the screen, his throat dry, his pulse loud in his ears. Frame by frame, the truth became impossible to deny. The man was positioned behind him in every recording, standing in the blind spot created by the camera's angle. Each night at 2:17, the figure appeared inches from Daniel's back, unmoving, patient. Daniel remembered the cold he felt, the pressure at his shoulders, the sensation of someone standing too close. He had always assumed it was fear or imagination. Now he understood it had been physical, real. His stomach twisted as he realized the man didn't need to approach the door because he had already crossed that distance. He had been sharing the same space all along. A sound pulled Daniel's attention away from the screen. The intercom crackled softly, the same way it had before, but this time the noise didn't fade in and out. It stayed. Breathing filled the small room, slow and deliberate, no longer distant. It sounded close enough to feel against his neck. Daniel pressed himself against the wall, fighting the urge to scream. He glanced back at the monitors. The live feed showed the front of the store, empty now. The door stood closed, untouched. Then the camera shifted to another angle, one that faced the counter. Daniel's knees nearly gave out. The man stood there, fully visible now, his head lifted, his body angled toward the lock-in room. The figure's face was still wrong. It wasn't blurred or hidden, it simply didn't look complete, like features had been smoothed away by time or erased through neglect. The eyes, however, were clear. They were fixed on the camera, unblinking, knowing. Daniel realized then that the man wasn't watching the screen. He was watching him. The lights overhead flickered violently, plunging the store into brief pockets of darkness. Each time the lights returned, the figure appeared closer in the frame. Daniel's ears rang as the breathing grew louder, filling the lock-in room until it felt like there was no space left for air. The digital clock clicked forward at last, changing to 2:18, but the relief never came. Daniel squeezed his eyes shut, counting silently, waiting for something to happen or stop happening. When he opened them again, the monitors showed nothing but empty aisles and humming lights. The intercom went dead. The air warmed slightly, just enough to make him doubt what he had felt. He stayed locked in the room until morning, unable to trust the silence. When daylight finally spilled through the windows, he left without checking out, without calling his manager, without looking back. The station looked normal in the sun, harmless even, but Daniel knew better. He understood now that what haunted that place didn't belong to the night. It belonged to the moment. Weeks later, Daniel still woke up at 2:17 a.m. every night. No matter where he was, the same cold settled in his chest. The same pressure filled the room. He stopped checking the time after a while, but his body never forgot. He learned that 2:17 wasn't when something arrived. It was when it revealed itself. The man had never needed to enter the gas station because he had never been outside of it. And Daniel hadn't been alone on those night shifts. Not once. The thought followed him everywhere, quiet and patient, waiting for the next moment when time would slow, the air would turn cold, and the space behind him would no longer feel empty. So that was tonight's story. One more reminder that the most disturbing horror doesn't come from monsters or legends, but from ordinary places when the lights are low and the clock keeps ticking. Night shifts, empty buildings, quiet roads. They all feel harmless until you realize how alone you really are. If this story stayed with you, if it made you uneasy or had you replaying certain moments in your head, then you're exactly where you need to be. This is Eerie Podcast, where true feeling night shift horror stories are told slowly, realistically, and without mercy. Make sure you subscribe to Eerie Podcast and turn on notifications because more disturbing true night horror stories are coming, and the next one might hit even closer to home. Thanks for listening, and be careful the next time you're working late at night.